Welcome to Mental Health Uncovered, a show dedicated to having candid, everyday conversations about mental health. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mental Health Uncovered. Today, I have the privilege of interviewing Joanne McAfee Maldonado. And I tried to go through at the very beginning of this interview and get all of the words correctly, and I'm still not doing well, but I'm going to do the best that I can. I am so happy to have Joanne because I really think that she's been through some serious things that are going to be really insightful for other people to hear. She's a native Delawarean residing on the ceded lands of the Nanticoke.
Yes.
See, I'm getting better. And Lenape tribes. See, there it is. She lives in Delaware with her husband Carlos and 2 adult children. She served in roles such as youth pastor, assistant pastor, Bible study teacher, and healing ministry facilitator, but left the traditional church in 2019 to follow a version of Jesus that was not defined by politics. After attending immigration law courses at Villanova, how do you say the university?
Villanova.
There it is. University. She began serving as an immigrant advocate and immigration specialist. She facilitates discussion groups that are focused on racial healing and honoring each person's lived experiences. She's been in the deconstruction and reconstruction process for 2 years and has grown greatly in her capacity to love others. And because of this empowering story, we are so happy to have her on the show. Joanne, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me.
Can you tell me a little bit about your story and how this all got started?
Sure. So my parents were actually both addicts and they were teenagers when I was born. So, that had all sorts of things that came along with it, not even being adults yet, not really having great adults to mimic in their own lives. And then also just dealing with addiction. So then the responsibility of a baby, I'm sure it was very stressful as kids. But that being born to parents that are addicts definitely comes with, its own automatic baggage because you learn very quickly that the adults in your life are not really able to care for you the way that you might need or protect you or just have it together. Maybe they don't get up out of bed to make meals for you. Maybe they aren't aware when you wander out the front door and down the road, these kinds of things. So I'm not saying I had those experiences. I'm just saying that that's pretty typical.
Reality.
Yeah.
Right. It's a reality for a lot of people that are growing up in those types of homes. You mentioned that your parents were teenagers when they had you. How old were they?
My mom was 16 when she got pregnant, and then she turned 17 and had me a couple months later. And my dad was 17 when I was born.
Okay, yeah.
So almost 18. Yeah.
Yeah, they were kids.
Yep.
And when you say addicts, tell us a little bit about what you mean by that.
So my mother, her whole life, I guess if she wasn't abusing prescriptions, she was usually doing like cocaine, sometimes crack. She definitely smoked a lot of weed, but of course we know that is not necessarily a gateway drug, or that it does have a lot of benefits to it. So I don't want to say that I don't want to vilify it, but it is just part of the story that she smoked a lot of weed. My father was, and still is actually, his story is very sad. I don't know him very well because he kind of checked out after I was about 8 years old. And I didn't see him again until I was 25. But
Oh, wow.
yeah, and he's always lived in the same small state of Delaware. But he's been in and out of prison because of his addiction. So because my father, when he's kind of on a binge, will do really erratic things like rob banks or rob Walgreens for Percocets or things like that. So my mom, on the other hand, was extremely high functioning as an addict, and she ended up always getting these jobs that normally people have to go to school for, but she was just really smart and she would pick up on things quickly. And most of the time people had no idea that she was an addict, but she, unless she was in like a really bad place where she was taking way too much prescriptions and just kind of out of it, which didn't really happen until later in her life. But yeah, so initially it was really just kind of weed. And I can even remember as a kid, like helping my mom to package weed because she sold it. So like I can remember like raking seeds over a screen and, or raking the weed over the screen to get the seeds out and then, putting it in the baggies. I knew where she kept it. So like if people came to the door and she was busy, I would go grab a bag, exchange it for the money. And I was like 5. So yeah.
Now you mentioned that your dad left at age 8. So that's probably a pretty big, and then returned at age 25. That's a pretty big gap. So tell me about what that was like growing up in a single parent household.
Well, so actually they broke up when I was 2, but my dad would still come for visitation here and there until I was 8.
Okay.
And then he kind of completely disappeared after that. When I was a kid, I don't remember this, but my mom tells me that I would tell people that my dad was dead.
Okay.
Because it was easier than explaining why he wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
I did live with grandparents, so my grandfather kind of filled in that role for me. But I definitely, as an adult looking back now, can recognize that there were some serious abandonment issues from my dad just taking off. And then there were periods of time too where my mom wasn't there. Like she would live other places and I would just stay with my grandparents for sometimes years of my childhood.
Well, I'm so happy that you had your grandparents, right?
Oh my gosh, yes.
Because you could have been in a situation where you were stuck in that situation without having a safe harbor. Were your grandparents a pretty good support? Was that a safe environment?
Yes. So my grandmother was actually my grandfather's second wife. So she was kind of like my step grandmother. But I always tell people she was like June Cleaver. Like she baked the cupcakes, and brought them to school on my birthday. She came to all my softball games. She, if I came home from school and she kind of felt like something was going on with me, she would stop what she was doing and sit down and like pull me into her lap and say, come on, talk to me. And she was just really wonderful. And I've always been so grateful that she gave me that because, my experience of what mom looks like before then was just kind of, not that my mom didn't try. Like I know she loved me, but I just think that 1, being a kid, and 2, just not having a good relationship with her own mother or having any type of nurturing poured into her, she really just didn't know how to do it.
Well, and when we look at substance use, that can also play a really big role in that you're focused on use and when you're going to get your next fix rather than being present. I don't really like the word addict so much because it's pejorative, but I understand what you're saying when you say that. So in that situation, you were kind of forced into an environment that was not safe for you. You did not feel, especially, you were too young probably to be able to say this is unsafe. But looking back on that, sounds like your grandparents recognized that as well and were able to kind of sweep in and provide that environment. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And so when I lived with my grandparents, even though it was a very safe place where I felt like my childhood was kind of reinstated, my mom would pop up here and there. She would come. Sometimes she would want to visit. Other times it would be because somebody was kind of dumping her off on the doorstep because she'd overdosed. and my grandfather would have to run her to the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
From there, she would, this happened probably a handful of times in my childhood, but each time she would come back from the hospital, she would flush everything. She would, feel so great, like, okay, I got a new start. I have another chance to, to get myself straightened out. And then she'd probably stay 3 or 4 days. And of course, my grandparents and my great grandmothers, who both lived with us, were very religious. So my mom would kind of tap into that whole thing while she was there, and, go to like prayer meetings with them and things like that. And so she would have this like really high of like, I'm going to do everything right now. I'm going to, I'm going to start over. It's going to be great. And then she would leave and go back into the same environment that she was using in. And then of course, it wasn't long before she'd be using again.
Right.
So
it's very, very hard. And for most people that are looking at getting out of that environment and changing, it takes several attempts to really make a change. So it's not too surprising, but I'm assuming that from your perspective as the kiddo in this environment, that this was extremely disheartening.
It was, but at the same time, because I had this, like you said, safe haven of my grandparents' house, definitely didn't affect me as negatively as it could have. And honestly, I mean, as the child, I didn't really understand everything that was happening. I knew that my mom would get kind of, out there sometimes. I knew that drugs were the reason. I had been exposed to different things, but I didn't have any understanding of, like you're saying, how difficult it was or what a struggle it was on a daily basis. And I also really didn't understand that she, I'm sure, was her worst critic in all of it. I just knew that as a kid that I had certain expectations of her,
right,
and that she wasn't able to meet them.
You wanted your mom, and your mom wasn't present. Absolutely.
And growing up in religion, I think also kind of primed me to be very judgmental in that situation. I look back at that now and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I didn't understand, and I was just really hard on her, So.
Yeah. So let's focus in on you. So we've talked quite a bit about your mom, but what I'm here to do is interview you and what your experiences are. So it sounds like going through that was very difficult. Did you end up in that environment with your grandparents, jumping in on the religious aspects of your grandparents' faith as a way of survival?
I did. And I actually, not too long ago, I wrote the foreword for a friend's book that talked about how religion actually kind of grooms us trauma grooms us for religion, in my opinion, because I think that we're so desperate to feel some type of normalcy and some type of structure that we fall into this mindset that if we can be part of this community and we can be accepted in some way, and maybe even if we can like do all the things and check all the boxes and, and be all the things that we're supposed to be, that all of those things that we never got will now be ours. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely think that if I had not suffered different traumas, that I may not have chosen that, it may not have been as appealing.
The fact that you were living with your grandparents and they're very religious, I mean, you were primed for that environment, it sounds like. So tell me about, so you were essentially there. Were you there until you graduated? Or what was your experience?
No.
I don't know if you went to school or didn't go to school, because I remember you're living in an interesting area, so I don't want to assume anything. So tell me what your experience is like growing up with your grandparents, so I don't make a judgment call here.
Yeah. So interesting enough, they were Episcopal.
Okay.
So they were religious, but it wasn't like we see with like mainstream, like evangelical type, like Baptist or Pentecostal, or it was a little more subdued. they did have a strong faith in God, and they did usually bring God into different things, and they did, read their Bible and things like that. But it wasn't as intense as what I experienced later in life, being, in the more mainstream evangelical type churches. But they definitely were good people. And I, as far as like being a child in that situation, they definitely created a very safe place for me to grow up and to kind of grow through some things. The thing is, I didn't even know that I had trauma or wasn't able to identify it as such until about a year and a half ago.
Oh,
so
really? Okay.
I just kind of lived on autopilot, like doing what I knew to do to kind of get through.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wasn't very self-aware, or, hadn't had enough information about why certain things are the way they are, or my responses to things, why I might be responding to things the way that I do. So.
Okay. So tell me your journey here. So you kind of covered your childhood and what that was like. Tell me about adolescence and then moving into young adulthood.
So as an adolescent, I was pretty into church. I went to a Baptist high school. Okay. And I did live with my mom during that time. She was still using, but she had married a man that was pretty well off. And so she wanted to be able to send me to private school. And the only private school that she was okay with was this Baptist school. So that, it had, good points and bad points. It was pretty strict, but at the same time, I still have a lot of good friends from there. I still keep in touch. I mean, thanks to social media, I still visit with some of them from time to time. But overall, and I mean, we were all really goofy kids. Like, we just did stupid stuff all the time and just cracked up. And, it was always like, who could pull pranks on each other, and mm-hmm. who could get away with stuff, who could get detention, all those things. So it was pretty fun. But at home, my mom was, like I said, she was very high functioning. So people really didn't know, like none of my friends at school knew that my mom, was having a hard time with substance abuse. And although I found out recently that one of my friends after high school would stop by to smoke weed with my mom, I didn't know that. So, but you know what? As an adult, I look back at that and I think about the fact that it was something that was healing for my friend. Mm-hmm. So, I'm happy that my mom could be there for her in that way. But anyway, so I guess in adulthood, that's kind of when I went into the whole, like, really deeply into church. When I was 21, I actually had a little bout of being outside of the church and, partying a lot and stuff like that. So I decided to go back to church. I got into like a charismatic church. It offered all the things that I talked about earlier. Initially, it seemed like it was something that I wanted to be a part of. I definitely felt that, now I realize it's more of like an energy thing or responding to like high resonance. But at the time I thought, you could only get into that like positive mindset and that place of peace if you were like worshiping God, Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now I've experienced it with lots of different, in lots of different settings. And I'm grateful that I understand that now. But at the time I just thought, we had cornered the market on peace and happiness, and that's where it was, and that's where you had to be. So I stayed in the church for many years. I got married the first time when I was 27, and I married a classic narcissist. I was married to him for 12 years. We had 2 kids together. It was pretty horrific. Looking back now, I can see where the things that I grew up with and the wounds that I still had and the ways that I processed things kind of set me up to to attract a person that would thrive with me as a narcissist. So I look at that now and I think, okay, not that I didn't know any better, but I do recognize that, like, had I had more healing, or had I, invested more in myself, or even gone to counseling back then, maybe I would have had a little more understanding of myself and then not gotten into that situation. But either way, it is what it is now. And my kids are, the result of that. And I'm grateful that I have them. But I think the common thread throughout my life, whether it be with my mom, whether it be with the church, or with my ex-husband, is that I have always been taught that I need to be grateful for everything. And I think that taught me to some extent to really bypass the things that were going on, to not call them, exactly what they were, to not say abuse when it was abuse.
Right.
And that's unfortunate, because I really, I really endured a lot of stuff over the years, because I was taught, I needed to look for what I could be grateful for, and also that I needed to have grace for other people and cover them when they're struggling, because that's what we do. And now looking back, I'm just like, sometimes when I think about the things that I've been through, I'm like pissed, and I'm like, I just wish I could go back into that moment and tell them what I really think,
Right. Well, and it's interesting because it's like all quote unquote in good intention. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's what's so infuriating about it all. I think for a lot of people who've been through the deconstruction, reconstruction process, is that it's when you start to look back and you see all of these things, like, oh, gratitude, right? Like, that's a good thing. Like, that's not a bad thing. But then we can use gratitude in such a way to cover serious trauma and then allow that trauma to continue.
Absolutely.
So it can actually be a very negative thing. We need to be able to call things what they are when they happen, so that we can actually get the care and the support that we need in that moment. So yeah, I can identify with that myself.
Yeah, probably everyone can. I don't think that people would stay in those situations if they didn't have some type of coping mechanism to get them, you know what I mean, to survive it. Or either that or they don't survive it, sadly, I am now remarried, and my husband is a wonderful person, and he's not a narcissist. Thank God.
Okay, that's progress.
He and I actually dated for about a year long distance, which gave us a lot of time to communicate and learn a lot about each other. So I always tell people, you might think that long distance is hokey, or that it's stupid, or that a lot of people say I could never do it. But I think it was the best thing for me, because it definitely gave me a very strong foundation with him to build with. And I'm grateful for that, because we still communicate very well, and we've been married for 7 years now. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. What has been what has been the most challenging thing that you've been through that has challenged your mental health?
I think the thing that I probably still struggle with, even though I've been in counseling for 1.5 years now, I think that I still struggle with, I guess at the core of it, it's like self-worth, because I still have a hard time, asking for help when I need it at home, or sometimes if I'm feeling a certain way and I want to talk to my husband about it, I'll feel like, I don't really want to burden him with this, or I feel like in this season especially, I feel like there's always something wrong, not necessarily with anything he's doing, but I just feel like, oh my gosh, I am a freaking hot mess. Like, this man has to deal with all of this day in and day out. And it has to become like tiring for him as well, because I know I'm exhausted a lot of the time. But I do kind of go into it letting him know that I'm getting better at it. And I'll say to him, this is what I need from you right now. I just need you to listen to me, because this is what I'm going through. And I'm still learning so much about myself and figuring myself out. And he is kind of my best friend. So, I'm like, sorry, but you wear a couple of hats here, and that's just the reality of it. So I'll, share different things with him. But it's good as well because, if there's something that I do, a behavior or something that he just doesn't understand, when I share different things about my past or about different traumas, a lot of times I will be able to connect the dots. And as I'm sharing that with him, and he's like, oh, okay, now it makes sense.
So being able to talk and being able to openly share where you're at is a very healing experience.
It is, because I'm a verbal processor. So
hey, me too. I have my list of people.
We need like an organization that we can join. Like all of us talk a lot.
Because I have to talk like every day. Like I have people that are on my list that I need to, if they don't answer, I go to the next one. I hate to say that, but it's true. I have a list of people that I have to call because I'm a verbal processor. I have to process through things. Absolutely. 100%. And so looking at this, looking at your story, looking at what you've been through, what have you found has been the most beneficial thing to help you overcome?
I think that therapy was definitely very important because it helped me to identify, like, sometimes when people get a diagnosis, they make it their whole identity. It's like, okay, I am CPTSD. And I think that that's okay if that's where they are and that's what they need to do at the time. But for me, it helped me more to separate it from myself and to say, like, this is something that affects me, but it doesn't necessarily define me. And so I can kind of hold it over here because now I can see what it is and I can name it for what it is.
Yes. Let's go back, though.
Okay.
Tell me your journey about getting diagnosed.
Okay. So I started to have some situations arise where, partially because of deconstruction, the relationships that I had that were really close, especially within the church, were really starting to become very disconnected. Mm-hmm. And so having had the abandonment in my past, it really was very triggering to have people, again, not there for me or not connecting to me on a regular basis. So, and especially because when you don't have that in your family, or you had it, but then you don't have it, you look for it elsewhere, right? So my church kind of became where I was really depending on that connection. And so anyway, I just started to have these times where I would just start crying and I couldn't stop. I just felt like I was so sad and just didn't know what to do and was really kind of grieving those relationships. And I also, because of the way that I had always done life, where we didn't call things what they were, when times in my life came where grief would have been appropriate, I didn't grieve. So then when things like this would happen, it was like everything would come to a head again because I had shoved all this stuff down.
And then it all becomes overwhelming. Absolutely. And you can't handle it and you shut down.
And you're like, am I crazy? I don't know what to do with this, right? So I decided to, go into counseling. And when I did, and I started to share with my therapist what I had going on, and then I was diagnosed with CPTSD and ADHD, I was kind of like, oh. So then I started looking at things. And of course, with social media, there's all these different graphics that come up that say things like ADHD paralysis and things like that I was experiencing that I never understood or had even heard of. So it just kind of opened this whole new world to me where I finally could understand why I was doing things the way that I was, or like I said, responding the way that I did to things. And because I now understood it and where it came from, I was able to choose something different.
So being able to assess allowed for options.
Yeah. Yeah. And also allowed me to see for the first time in my life that I had choices. Because of course, trauma is that feeling of I have no choices, right? I have no control right now and I have no choices. And so every time that something would come up for me in counseling, I would be like, okay, so what am I going to do with this now? And it was very empowering. And I still do that in my everyday life. I look at, every time something comes up, and especially if it's triggering, I say to myself, what are my choices right now? Because I have them. I might not like any of them, but I have them.
So when things become overwhelming and you feel like you can't do anything, you ask yourself, what are my choices?
Yes. Yep. I have to stop. I usually do a little bit of breathing to kind of, ground myself first. But then I'll say, okay, what are my choices right now? Because if I don't ask myself and then I won't discover them. If I'm really like, if I'm having anxiety or whatever, I just won't. So it also kind of redirects me so that I can be in like solution mode instead of problem mode. So yeah, it's and I do that with a lot of people too, because I see it now that I recognize it in me. Of course, I see it in other people as well. And when someone is like freaking out and they're just like, I don't know what I'm going to do right now. Like, I don't, this is terrible and this is what's going on. I don't want to make it sound like I just pound them with something, but I usually will listen for a while and then I'll say, okay, well, let's think about this for a moment. What are your choices right now? What can you do that's different? And even if it's nothing, that's a choice.
Yes, nothing is a choice.
So, but acknowledging that is empowering because I chose nothing. It wasn't all I had. I chose it.
Right. Allowing that autonomy, giving yourself the ability to make the choice and giving that power back to you. Because the one thing that trauma will do is it will strip you of control, and it makes you feel like you have no control over your life and what's happening. And part of regaining your ability to control your life is being able to understand that I have some of that back, even if it is small things.
Yes.
Like, what am I going to eat for breakfast this morning? Just even throwing those things in and breaking that down can give you a sense of control and stability that you might not otherwise have.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love the word autonomy because that's something that I didn't feel like I ever had within the church. And I definitely didn't feel like I had it concerning God. And so now I love to tell people God created me as an autonomous, intelligent being. That's how we're made, and of course I get a lot of pushback for that, but I'm just like, no, like he doesn't make you do anything. You are allowed to choose. He created you to be able to make choices. So yeah, that's been really freeing.
Is there anything in addition that I've not touched on that you think is really, really important?
I just want to say that for anybody who is struggling with, whatever's going on with them, it is really important to understand what it is, to be able to name it, not because it has to be, who you are, but because we can't advocate for ourselves if we don't know what it is that we need, right? And we can't know what we need if we don't know what it is that we're dealing with.
There's a quote that I used to hold on to in my own life that states, you cannot change or heal what you do not acknowledge. And so that's part of that naming, is that we have to be able to acknowledge it in order to change or heal it.
Yes, absolutely.
And living in a world where we just push it away and we drown it, or we pretend it's not there, we're just living in a world of avoidance until it becomes a bigger issue.
Right. And the other thing is, now that I've known what I have going on, not only do I advocate for myself, but I also make accommodations for myself. So where I struggle, I have tried to find different tools that will help me to continue to move forward and be successful in whatever it is that I'm trying to do. So for instance, ADHD, I make lists all the time. I have to. I will forget. I am like, shiny, squirrel, whatever. Like I cannot stay focused on things like for long periods of time. So I am constantly writing down, this is what I need to get done today. I number them, what's most important, priority wise. And then I just keep going back, and if it's something within my workspace where I need, like, I can't handle things well. Like if I'm focused on something and somebody walks in and interrupts me and they want me to stop and focus on what they're doing, my brain does not work like that. So like, I need you to come in and give me a moment to finish my thought with what I'm doing. But if I don't say that, people don't know. And so then it's triggering, right? Because now I have stress of this thought that I know I'm about to lose. And then this trail that this person's about to take me on. So yeah, we have to, like I said, if we can't identify it, we can't advocate for ourselves. We can't set good boundaries with other people, and we can't care for ourselves well in the environments that we're in so that we, can be happy where we are. Like in my job right now, because I'm able to do that, because I have been able to say things, and because I do kind of push back if something doesn't feel right to me now. I never would have done that before. I never would have stuck up for myself because I didn't think that I was worth that. And I didn't think that it just wasn't anything in my toolbox, But now that I've been, like I said, in therapy for like a year and a half, and I have done a lot of work and a lot of healing, I'm just really grateful that my life looks very different than it did a year and a half ago.
In hearing that, it sounds like therapy has been, you kind of already shared this, but I want to talk about it too. It sounds like therapy has been something that's been a very healing experience for you, and it's actually resulted in changed behavior, changed life.
Yes.
But that didn't happen overnight. It took work, I would assume. But therapy was the venue that got you there.
Yeah, it was. And I think that it's good to understand that there are thousands or millions of therapists available to us, and that it's okay if you don't mesh well with the first person or the second person or the third person you meet with, but that it is important enough to keep going until you find a person that you do mesh well with. For me, I need someone who is definitely like sensitive to the fact that I've been through trauma, who doesn't push me. I'll say this, that knows when to push me and when not to, right? Because I do need sometimes to have like the mirror held up and for the person to say, this is not a healthy behavior right now. Like, we need to talk about that, and you need to have more awareness about it. And sometimes that's enough, is just to say, okay, we've identified it, and just let me process it for a while. But then there are times when, because maybe I've been triggered about somebody like trying to force me to do something recently, and that just sets me off. And then I go into a therapy session. And if my therapist is then like pushing about something, like that's not a good time to push, right? So somebody that is somewhat intuitive, but also really gets to know their clients well. So.
Yeah. Well, I think that therapy can be a very powerful experience, but it's all about finding the right therapist and finding the right treatment modality for you.
Yes.
And so for those who are interested in therapy or who have gone to a therapist and had a negative experience, my first encouragement to you is don't give up. Keep searching, keep looking, because it really can be a powerful experience.
And you're worth it.
You are. And so is Joanne. And I'm so happy that you joined this podcast today. Do you have any questions? Is there anything that you'd like to really talk about before we wrap things up?
I don't know. The only other thing I can say is that when you get into a place where you're honoring yourself more, you'll start to follow your dreams a little more as well, because you won't have, all of the fears and the hangups that you used to have, or that used to stand in the way, or the, negativity in your own mind telling you that you can't do it, or all the reasons you can't do it. So that's why I ended up, going to school for immigration law, because it was something that I was really passionate about. I had been advocating for a while. And I mean, I'm old, so like going to school was a big deal for me.
And I actually forgot about immigration law. So tell us really quickly what you're doing.
Okay, so
let's promote you.
I am an immigration specialist. I work for a nonprofit, and I basically do family-based immigration cases now, which is where people come and they need applications filled out for different things like green card or work authorization or whatever. I don't actually work asylum cases yet, but I'm working towards that. That's kind of my goal. But I have to shadow a lawyer for about a year before I can do that. But I've applied for my partial accreditation, and I hope to get that soon, which, allows me to continue doing what I'm doing. It'll also allow me to accompany clients to like immigration appointments and things like that if they want me to go.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but the reason I got into it was because I went to the border in 2019, was able to experience hearing the stories of people that were migrating and why. And, we got to talk to Border Patrol. We got to just kind of really get lots of different perspectives about what was going on. And I just wanted to do something, I was like, I need to do something helpful in this situation. So what's available, how can I make an impact? So outside of like the actual work, I do some advocacy. Like I'll hop on Zoom calls with senators and things like that and talk about policies and, where we are with things and what reform we really need. Sometimes there's things that come up that are concerning, like there's, kids in a detention center that have terrible things going on, and I'll reach out to their offices about that kind of stuff as well. So but yeah, that's kind of where I am. But I love it. I love being around people of all different cultures and languages. And, I don't know. I always have loved that, but it's almost like I'm just so excited to be able to help them in some way. And I know that sometimes they're not welcomed or treated well. So when they come here, I just try to make sure that they really feel welcomed. So.
Well, I'm happy that you're there. And it sounds like your experience, while it has been traumatic in your personal life, you're using that to help others. And I think that's one of the more powerful messages that I'm getting the more and more interviews I do, is really seeing how people have taken what has happened to them and transformed that to help others. And you're doing it.
Yeah, thank you. It's definitely, somebody said to me recently, had you not walked through the traumatic things that you had, you may not be able to connect as easily with people that have gone through these different traumas that they've through. And I was just like, you're right. That's a really cool point. But yeah, I'm definitely way more sensitive to those things and in the way that I handle them and the way that I handle them sharing their stories and, so sure. But thanks.
Absolutely. Well, I want to say thank you so much for joining our show. Is there anything that you'd like to promote?
I would like to promote people just really listening to people that live a different experience than they do. No matter what that looks like, no matter what people group it may be that they belong to, if there's something that divides you from another person, I encourage people to seek out someone from that people group and to listen to their story.
Okay. And with that, Joanne, I want to thank you so much for coming on to Mental Health Uncovered.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please remember that Mental Health Uncovered does not provide any type of therapeutic, clinical, psychiatric, or medical advice and is intended for entertainment purposes only. If you need such care, I encourage you to find such a professional in your community. You can locate and access your local crisis line by calling 988. Thanks again for listening.